Most of that document is pretty outdated. Making sound here. And as some of you might remember, the city was awarded a grant through the state's TGM grant program, Transportation and Growth Management program, to update our transportation system plan. And so we have finally kicked off that project. And so John Bosket is here with DKS to let you know where we're at the beginning of that process and what to expect, and hopefully to hear what questions and concerns you all have up front. So I'll hand it over to John.
All right, thanks. Get the presentation up there. Can you hear me okay on the microphone? Yeah.
You're gonna have to point that right at you.
All right, better?
Yeah.
Sounds better.
Thank you.
Sadie,
Yeah.
I can't share my screen. Can you make me a co-host? I don't know. There we go. Thank you.
All right. So thanks for your time this evening. And as Taylor said, we're early in this process of updating your transportation system plan. And so this is an opportunity for us to do a check-in with you, let you know what this process is going to look like, and also get some early feedback and direction. So it's kind of what I'm going to cover here. My timing is on. It should be about 15-20 minutes of presentation. So leave plenty of time for questions after that. Although it's fine if you want to interrupt and ask a question right away at any point. But I'll just kind of do an overview of what the transportation system plan is, how it's used. And then a little bit about a couple of the key things that we've already done in there in kind of draft form, which is framing up our public outreach approach for the process, and also the goals and objectives that are going to kind of guide us throughout this. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So for the overview of what a transportation system plan is, go ahead and go to the next slide. If you're familiar or not familiar with your current transportation system plan, it is an extension of your comprehensive plan. So it acts as the transportation element of that. If you look at your comprehensive plan right now, I think the transportation element's about 2 pages long, I think, and it's really just some kind of goal statements and high level discussion, and it points back to this document. So it's also, we're looking at long range. So we're doing a 20-year planning horizon, and looking at what kind of growth are we expecting to have over the next 20 years. And then what should we be doing with the transportation system, and how should we be investing in it to meet that growth and accommodate everyone's needs as best we can, obviously within financial limitations. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So just a couple of reasons why they're important. One is, long range planning, long range transportation planning is really done at all levels. So, the state and the county, even state parks, and the city all do long range planning. So it's an opportunity for us to coordinate with them during this process, to make sure that we're kind of taking advantage of kind of common opportunities and obviously not conflicting with each other. And then also, as you've experienced a lot of growth recently, and so it's important to make sure that we know what the long range needs are for transportation. So as all that new growth comes in, we're kind of preserving the right corridors that we need for long-term transportation needs, getting things built the way that we need to get them built at that time. So hopefully nothing important gets precluded by development because we were too late with that. Go ahead to the next slide. So if we do all that well, hopefully it's going to act as the basis for better investment decisions, because any transportation project is usually pretty costly, and so you want to make sure that when you are spending that money, that you're doing it in a way that I think is thoughtful with what the future needs are and kind of strategic. And then also it's almost a pass-fail criteria if you're applying for grant funding for transportation projects, which a lot of communities do. If it's not a project that's in an adopted transportation plan, you're pretty much out of the game. So you've really got to have it in there. So that shows whoever's, giving the money, this has already gone through a public process and has been supported. So there's a lot less risk that they'll give the money and then project won't go through. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And then also, as we'll talk about towards the end of this presentation, when we get into the goals and objectives, hopefully we're doing this in a way also that is aligning with a lot of other community values. And again, getting back to how much you're investing in transportation, and hopefully it's done in a way where it complements a wide range of community objectives. Sometimes very directly transportation oriented, sometimes tangentially, but we'll just talk about that a little bit more when we get into the goals and objectives. So go ahead and go to the next slide. And speaking of the goals and objectives, so as far as what TSPs include, this should look like a familiar structure if you've looked at your current TSP, and this is more or less the main elements that they all include. The goals and objectives is a key piece. Usually you see that somewhere in the front because that tells us what's important to accomplish with transportation and in this community. And we use that throughout the process. We use it to tell us where maybe something should be improved. When we're developing types of solutions to address things, to maybe tell us what types of solutions would fit this community the best. And then when we come forward with a draft set of solutions, we use it to evaluate those potential outcomes to show us we have a reasonable expectation of aligning with those kind of core community values. And you can even use those after the TSP is adopted. If there's future decisions that need to be made that aren't specifically prescribed in the plan, you can always refer back to those goals and objectives as kind of your guideposts. In addition to that, there's obviously some modal plans. So for the major modes of transportation, typically that's walking, biking, transit, and driving. There'll be lists of projects, could also be programs, doesn't have to be purely concrete asphalt type things that address the long range needs. Standards is another one on here. So that's things like typical street cross-section designs. Which I know we've talked about quite a bit in the meetings we've had with the stakeholder group that we've got about need to revisit that and make sure that what we're saying we want to build for streets of certain types is really meeting the community's needs. Financing is an important one too, as part of this process. We want to look out 20 years, make an estimate based on what your past, revenue sources and amounts have been for transportation projects and say, okay, well, how much do we think we might have over this next 20 years? And then, one of the obvious outcomes is we're going to have a ton of projects and a ton of needs. And the cost of that will be far more than the amount you're going to have to pay for all of it. And so what we want to do and need to do is get the priority projects based on community input that best match that budget. And that's called your financially constrained project list. That's kind of an important and required part of this process. And then lastly, if there's any code or policy updates that are needed, either to just get them up to date with maybe if there's been changes in state regulations, or to help us implement the plan as we've written it, that'll be included in this process as well. This one. Okay, so the process for updating your TSP. I think you can see all of that box there. So it should run through the fall of 2023. There we go. So we're right here. We're still early in the process. So it's basically kind of thinking of dividing this whole process into these three kind of main segments that we've described as understand, evaluate, recommend, and adopt. And so in this first few months, we're really looking at the existing transportation system, trying to make an assessment of where are the things that are working, maybe where are the gaps, talking with our committees, getting input from the public on what are their barriers, what do they want to see addressed in transportation long range in the city. Again, also framing up those goals and objectives early to help guide us through our process. And then as we transition to the evaluate stage, That's when we start to develop some draft solutions to address the needs that we identified in the previous step. And then if we work through that with more community input, we go to the last step, which is recommend and adopt, and that's where we provide the draft plan and would go through the public hearings process. And so along the bottom here, if you can see this, and I'll cover this a little bit more, I think on the next slide, we're working with a stakeholder group. Yeah, go ahead.
Question for you. We have a traffic and public safety group committee that's gonna be, I think, appointed to next month, correct? I don't see them up on there, and I think that's gonna be a critical group because that's what they do. So how's you planning to incorporate them into the process there?
We could, once they're appointed, we could probably invite them to be involved in that stakeholder group, or unless that's too far down the road, I mean, I don't know, they'll kind of be coming in, but we'll be doing a lot of public outreach. And so I don't know, how do you see a new committee like that fitting in, John?
Yeah, and so our whole plan and structure predates that group. Obviously, we've talked about them coming on. In fact, that came up in the stakeholder group meeting we had just a couple of weeks ago. I think how exactly we incorporate them, we haven't quite figured out yet, but we know that we need to. It could be like what we've done with the diversity, equity, inclusion committee that we're also meeting with. We have, representative or two on our larger stakeholder group. Once that new committee's formed, that could be one way of doing that. It could also be some, briefings for them to get input, but.
Yeah, I'd see them being a key element in this because traffic is literally part of one of the things that they do. It's in their name. So I think it's important to get them as involved as possible so that they can not only be fully informed of what's going on, but they can actually put their input as a group as well. Because that's kind of what one of their jobs are supposed to be. So I have a secondary question, if I may, there. Who's your stakeholder group? Who's in the stakeholder group?
Do you have the list in front of you?
I
It's a
don't-
long list.
I would have to unshare the screen.
We used to have, I'll say we used to have a like an agency, what's that called? The stakeholders was split into two, the community advisory committee, or public advisory committee, PAC, and then the technical advisory committee, and the stakeholder group has them all combined. So we were very happy with the turnout we had. We had ODOT on there, we had Clackamas County, we had
ODOT, county, TriMet, fire district, school district. Yeah, Todos Juntos.
trying to think of like
There's like
specific community members.
15 or 20 people. We've got planning commission, council, and DEI committee representation. I think we'll hope to add a traffic and safety committee person once that's up and running.
Yeah, there's a whole list of the people who came to the
Yeah,
stakeholders
there's-
group meeting in the meeting notes for what was it, 2 weeks ago?
That sounds right.
Yeah.
And I heard you mention those community members in there as well, correct?
Yes,
Awesome,
Yeah.
thanks.
we could send that list. We could send that list out to them.
Yeah,
to see
actually,
who else participating.
Yeah.
That'd be great, thank you.
Make a
Appreciate
little
it.
note of that. And then we'll incorporate the traffic and public safety committee as we can, but we'll also be taking information back to them at their meetings. This is a great time for them to be getting started, as you're pointing out. So.
Yeah, if that group is assembled next month, kind of our next meeting with the stakeholder group is going to be when we got our draft memo of kind of the findings of what works and what doesn't today, but also our future kind of no build forecast. The timing may work out where if the approach we want to take was include some of them on that stakeholder group. I think that should work out. So that's where we'd be in the process.
Awesome, thanks.
So shown on here with that stakeholder group, we're meeting 4 times with them. We've already met once with them a couple weeks ago. Also, we're meeting about the same intervals with the DEI committee. We've got 3 city council briefings along the way. And these 2 community workshops, which are kind of our major community public involvement efforts. So there's one at that kind of turning point is we're finishing the understand stage and moving into evaluating and developing alternatives. And then another one once we've got those ideas to get feedback on that. We've got a public website. It's set up where I think we're pretty soon we're going to be doing our first big kind of blast announcement to kind of hopefully direct people towards that and start to get them engaged. And why don't you go ahead and go to the next slide. So again, this is just kind of framing up the decision-making process for this. Obviously, city council up here, you're the main decision-making body. You would be adopting the plan. And planning commission has their typical relationship with you as we would take that through them first. They would make recommendations to city council. And again, our stakeholder group, they're really our main advisory body. And so, you know, our goal is before we bring our draft plan forward to you, we can have that group saying, yep, this is the plan that we endorse. The DEI committee, again, we're meeting with them on about the same intervals, a little bit different focus. We're specifically bringing things to them and asking them to kind of look at it through an equity lens. Not only our process to help us kind of through this public engagement process, but also just some of the recommendations and outcomes of the TSP. And of course, over there, that's the project team. So we kind of do the work and respond to everybody. And the public is engaged kind of throughout that process, either through the website or for the community events. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So I think our public outreach process, one of the documents I believe was in the packet was the public and stakeholder involvement strategy. And that's, if you got a chance to look at that, that's really kind of like our playbook for our community outreach. And it includes a lot of things. It's got, you know, engagement goals, key messages, that decision-making process I just talked about, a list of key stakeholder groups, outreach tools, some communication protocols, and even some evaluation criteria to kind of gauge how we're doing it in implementing. And some of the key outreach tools that we plan to use that are documented in that. Again, the project webpage, the DEI committee and our stakeholder group, city council briefings. Of course, you know, now in some form, we'd be adding the traffic and public safety committee. We plan to do a little bit of youth outreach, some education materials that provide some feedback opportunities. There'll be a project flyer going out prior to the first open house. It's kind of, again, it's one of our big advertisements for the project in our community workshops. Going to go to the next slide. So again, I mentioned we met once with the DEI committee and once with the stakeholder group. So I think I've got a couple of slides here, just kind of summarizing some of the key points that came up during those meetings. This one is specifically regarding some of the recommendations for outreach strategies to help us with our process. Obviously sharing information through a Spanish-speaking church, food bank, community center, a newsletter, school district flyers, Estacada News, the library, and our stakeholder group meeting. Todos Juntos said they'd be interested in helping us engage with Spanish-speaking people. Also mailing postcards using Facebook, Nextdoor, working with the traffic and public safety committee that came up. And then we got some feedback. There was a format that was used for the community workshops for the housing meeting and What's Up Estacada that they thought was pretty effective, which was fairly common format, but basically we'd give kind of a brief presentation in the opening of the community meeting, kind of do some question and answer as a group, and then kind of open it up for people to kind of walk around the different stations and have some more one-on-one conversations. Providing a variety of ways for people to give feedback in case, you know, one of them really isn't going to work for them. And then encouraging us to use common language that everyone can understand in our documents. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And then kind of some of the key issues that were raised by those groups. Definitely heard, concern about how growth is increasing infrastructure needs and how that cost impacts existing residents and is impacting Estacada's affordability. Noting that Estacada's got an aging population with mobility challenges and fixed incomes. People want to see diversified investments with regard to the types of projects that get funded. There's a note that a lot of people in the Spanish-speaking communities generally rely on transit more, but it's not always very accessible, especially some of the new subdivisions can create a pretty long walk and pretty long distance to get to transit. Considering transportation improvements to enhance tourism, recognition that as residents living further out, especially elderly and disabled, can't easily access transit. That was where the community center was telling us about some success they had, especially during the pandemic with running some shuttles to get people into the transit, but how they just can't meet the need. Highway connections are becoming congested. And again, there's that need to reconsider street design requirements and their functional needs. Go to the next slide. So there again, we have our project website. It is up and running. It's within the city's website. So we've just got our own page there. That's where we've got opportunities for folks to kind of learn about the project. They can get signed up for a mailing list. They can submit comments. Our project documents, when they're ready for public review, will all get posted here. And again, pretty soon we're going to be pushing out our kind of our big first announcement and hopefully draw people towards that. Go ahead. So the goals, objectives, and evaluation criteria. Again, as I mentioned before, it's really what we're trying to do is understand what's important in Estacada, broader community values, but also specifically what do you want to improve or accomplish with the transportation system. And obviously we're looking for specifically for what your community members are saying, because this is your TSP. Again, I mentioned before, but once again, we apply this and use this throughout the process, whether it's identifying what needs to be fixed or what's working well, developing the right types of solutions, and then letting us know if those are the right types of solutions, how well we've done. And then you can even use those as guideposts going forward in the future. Go ahead. So the goals and objectives memo, I believe, was included in the packet. So hopefully you've got that. We did do a little bit of tweaking to it after the stakeholder group meeting. We did a walkthrough with the stakeholder group, looked at the goals and all the individual objectives. And one of the big changes we made was they said economic development. At the time, it wasn't its own standalone goal. We had some objectives that really kind of fit it, but they were kind of tucked under other things. So, but they wanted it to be more prominent as its own goal area. So we made that change. So kind of the main topic areas we've got there, and a lot of these are fairly common for a transportation plan. It's safety, active transportation, mobility and accessibility, equity, environment, economic development, capital investments and funding, and regional coordination. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. And really kind of when we're going through the goals and objectives, one of the questions I just asked the group is kind of a way for us to check if our goals and objectives are complete. Was just a simple question of, what do you think are the big issues for transportation in the community? What do you want us to see, address? And we can go back and look at those comments. We can look back at our goals and objectives, and we think we've got everything covered. It should kind of send us off on the right course. So with that, I'll kind of open it up for any questions you've got. I kind of threw out some suggestions you could respond to if you want to. And it's again, which one of them is simply, what do you think the most significant transportation issues are that you want to see addressed with this process? And then also, if you've got any suggestions for improving our public process. With that, I'll turn it to you.
Joel?
Inside this plan you have here, it's for the stakeholder group. I finally found the list in here. So apologize, I missed that before. But one of the things you identify is making sure you represent people with disabilities. I'm kind of curious on that stakeholder group who is representing that piece, because in Estacada, that's one of the biggest problems I think we have is with our transportation. Besides many other things, is there's issues with people with vision disability crossing our major streets. We have down our parking areas, we have handicap spots only one side of the block. Where if you want to go to the middle of the block, you have to go all the way around the block to get to it. I mean, these are consistent issues we have in the city. So I'm kind of curious, and then, you know, we also have people within wheelchairs that have trouble getting around. Who's on the stakeholder group that's speaking into that besides the DEI?
Go ahead.
Yeah, the community center representative, I think her name is Valerie. Yeah, had a lot to say related to people with disabilities and access,
It would
especially.
be my recommendation is there's people in the community that actually deal with that directly. I would seek them out and in the community and get their input, because no one can give you a perspective of someone that, you know, the able bodied versus someone who's trying to, you know, that can't see or has to use a wheelchair. We can take our best guess, but they're gonna have the best perspective on it. So I would advise you to seek them out. I'm sure plenty of people here know who they can, you know, Melanie, I'm sure you know people you can put them in contact with.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that
So.
suggestion.
Some more questions?
Could you go back one slide? You've got the goals up there and give just a quick definition of what each one of those are.
Sure. Let's see. All right, so under the safety goal, the definition, there's improve the safety of the transportation system for all users. So it's fairly obvious for safety. Active transportation, here we're really focused on walking and biking, more so than transit, which sometimes get lumped into that phrase. It's a complete safe networks of facilities that make walking and biking an attractive choice by people of all ages and abilities. And just a note there, just 3-4 years ago, a fair amount of work was done on walking and biking, long-range planning as part of your active transportation plan. It was kind of standalone effort that was done. And our aim is not to reinvent that after only a few years, but really to pull all that into the TSP. And there's some areas where it needs to be kind of extended more into the UGB where it wasn't covered before, but we really want to retain all that work. Mobility and accessibility is promote efficient travel that provides access to goods, services, community facilities, homes, and employment to meet daily needs of all users, as well as to local and regional activity centers. Equity is support an equitable transportation system that justly allocates the benefits and burdens of transportation projects, policies, plans, and processes. Environmental is minimize environmental impacts on natural resources and encourage carbon neutral or efficient transportation facilities. I actually have the old version in front of me, so I don't have the economic development one. I could grab it if it's on my computer. But there's that one. Then capital investments, that's promoting cost-effective investments to the transportation system. And the regional coordination, which a lot of this is stuff you're required to do, but it's coordinate with other jurisdictions to plan and fund projects that better connect Estacada with the region and are consistent with local, regional, and state plans.
Yeah, great, thanks. I'm on the committee as well, to the stakeholder committee, and we spent quite a bit of time looking over those and discussing those, and they're pretty high level titles there, but I think it'd be good for the council to know what those, what went in behind those as well too. And I think economic development had to do with accommodating the businesses in town and the growth of the businesses.
Yeah, a
As
little bit
well,
was,
too.
there's some ones about freight movement, which is probably largely highway related, but yeah, other ones about improving walkability or maintaining it in the downtown to, support business activity, and some other things about recreational tourism.
And then you've had experience doing the public outreach We've got two of those coming up here. What has your experience been in getting folks together to look through all of this and to get them really engaged? What are some successes that you've seen in the past?
I think a lot of it has to do with how much effort, especially, kind of our stakeholder group, everybody we can get, kind of our project partners, and just getting the word out and helping get people there. I think, that's usually the biggest challenge. It's long range planning. It's not the same as they're digging up my street, right? Everybody shows up to that meeting. Sometimes it's harder to understand what the value of going to a transportation system plan update, process is. So I think it's one, it's maybe messaging that in a way that communicates the value of maybe why you'd be interested in showing up, but then really helping get the word out.
Great, thanks.
Sure. So our Parks and Recreations Committee, they've put a lot of work into, when the new developments come in, trying to make a connecting path that walking or biking path that goes through, all the new developments that will end up getting you into Estacada, into, the core of the city. Are you working, or is there anybody in the stakeholders, or are you working with Parks and Rec?
Yes, they are on the stakeholder group, and I do recall them mentioning that they were working on some trail planning that would actually get you all the way from the north end of town down to the river. So that's something where you're right. We're definitely need to coordinate with them and make sure that we're kind of doing the same things,
Nice.
incorporating that into our plans.
Katie. She was unmuted.
Oh,
She
she
muted
just-
herself.
You're muted, Katie.
Yeah, and sorry, she just joined me as a panelist, so it took my phone a second to catch up. So I didn't hear anything in this presentation today, but I've heard it several times since 2020 about the council's concerns for, I guess, wildfire resiliency, not necessarily making our roads wildfire resilient, but more the idea of having more than one route to evacuate if our city faces another evacuation. And I guess I was kind of wondering where you could fit something like that into the goals, whether it be a wildfire resiliency goal or put that under the safety aspect of the goals, because we as a city do have general concerns about the fact that many of our people have like one or maybe possibly two not reliable routes to escape from wherever they're at. And so when we're looking at our transportation system plan for the next 20 years, I guess keeping in mind some multiple routes out of wherever we're trying to get out of would be a goal that I would think would be important to this council.
Yeah, that is definitely something that we can address, and that's come up before. And I think the safety goal would be a perfect place for that.
All right, thank you, Katie. Joel?
Thanks, Katie. You actually took one of the ones I had on there, so I'm glad you brought that up as well. So a couple of things that I heard you mentioning when you're kind of going through some of those goals. Something just to keep in mind as you're putting the plan together. Estacada doesn't fit most other cities out there. We're not a one size fit all. We're definitely different out here. So for example, we don't have as many bikers out here as an inner city would. And so bikes is not a big thing. I don't see them very often on the streets here. We have bigger vehicles, so we don't fit smaller streets well in this area. People need more room to move their vehicles around. Things like that are things definitely to consider as you're developing the plan, because that's the culture, that's the people that are out here. They're the ones moving around in these cities. So we need to definitely consider when we're putting these together that we don't try to put a one size fits all. Portland or even Milwaukee or any of those other places aren't going to fit for what Estacada does. Places like Sandy or places like Malala, their TSPs might fit better out here than other places because they have the same thing we do. We're a rural town. So just keep that in mind as you're going through and working these pieces out, that we don't have all the same things like inner cities do, because that's not who the people are out here for the majority. A lot of them use bigger trucks and do different things. But a big thing was the wildfire safety piece on there. And one of the things to consider is we do have during the wildfire season is when we have the most visitors out here. So kind of like the beach does, evacuation routes and identified evacuation routes might be a good idea for wildfire evacuation routes for people that are visiting. Locals are gonna know where to go, but you know, the thousands of people that are up the, in our city or just up the road aren't gonna know where to go. So.
Thank you. And no one.
Yeah, I think that's a good, you use the term one size fits all and how we don't fit with in other categories. And I think that's really good to remember. And I think one size fits all doesn't necessarily fit our community because we're not like you can go to some town and it's like there's very common similarities between all the people. And we do have people with large vehicles. And we have a lot of motorcycle riders and we have people who want to ride bikes, but it's a little difficult in town right now. So we don't have like one size fits all that we can match another city, but we also don't have one size fits all that matches our whole community. And so to get feedback from everybody is going to be really important. And do you think that, I know you mentioned, John, that there's some things that just have to be in the plan. I can't remember how you phrased it, but they are required to have in the plan. But can the community really have an impact on how this plan turns out? Or are there like standards and regulations that we're just going to be stuck with? Or if people come out to share their ideas, is that going to make an impact? And how much of an impact?
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of variability in what your NTSP could look like. And that's community driven. So yeah, there's certainly going to be some things that are required and we have to have, but so that's pretty minimal. It's only doing those things won't give you much of a plan. There's still a lot of things we need to do, and that's how you want to do it is up to you. I'll certainly provide my advice and recommendations along the way, but like I said, at the end of the day, this city has to adopt a plan, so it's got to fit your community.
Okay, that's encouraging to hear.
All right, any more questions?
Sorry, I got one last question. Thanks, Mayor. How much does the ODOT consider our plan when they make decisions?
Means kind of day to day, even after it's adopted, how much do they use it and consider it? I would say quite a bit. I mean, they're a partner in this, as they usually are in local TSPs because, well, they have a highway, right, that comes through the city. And so this is really how they do a lot of their long range planning for their transportation system. It's through local TSPs.
So if the city came out and said that we hate these changes they did out here and we think they should fix them, that they're like that in that consideration?
Yeah, I think they would. I mean, it's like I said, it's if that's what gets into the adopted plan, of course, you have to recognize that ODOT is the owner of it, right? They're gonna have to approve it or won't be a point in putting it in the plan, but yes.
I get that. I just want to
it's a
kind of
place to
curious
have
the
that
impact that's
conversation.
going to have, because that might stir some people to come out and to join up with put their input in. So.
But it's the perfect time to have that conversation.
All right, any more questions? No, we thank you. That was a great presentation. I think you covered all the bases and I'm glad you answered all the questions from council up here. Taylor, I'm going to hand it back over to you now.
Yeah,
Have any more you
thanks.
wanna add?
Thanks, everybody. I don't think I have anything to add. We'll keep you updated on future participation opportunities and look forward to the traffic committee being set up and getting involved.
Do we have
So-
any dates right now to share that are coming up, or we don't really have that community open house scheduled yet? That'll be
No,
later
that's
down.
not scheduled, but
several months.
it will all be posted on the website. It's just the city's website /TSP. You can also go there to sign up to receive email updates about the project regularly. So please sign up for those. Otherwise, we'll keep you updated.
Great. Thank you
Thanks.
very much, Taylor and team. And we appreciate you tonight. So thank you. And I will close the workshop. And we got about 20 minutes.